Hello kindergarten, so today we are going to explore painting media in art. And remember that media means the art supplies that we use in our rooms, like crayons, paint, markers, scissors, glue. And we always use non-toxic supplies, and non-toxic means they won't hurt you. So we don't use any supplies that might hurt you or make you feel sick. So you've got your paper, you're going to fold it in half 2 times, and remember how we do that. We pick up our paper, bring one side over to the other side, use one hand to hold the side down, use the other hand to bring your finger across, to crease the paper, open it up. You're going to bring the top of your paper down to the bottom of your paper, hold it with one hand, use your other hand to go across and crease, open it up, and you have 4 boxes. So again, you're going to take your pencil like last time, and you're going to trace those creases with your pencil so that you get 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes. Flip it over and write your name and the day you have art, day A, day B, day C. Okay. Alright, so the first art media that we are going to use today is Tempera Paint. We're going to need a water basin just to store our messy paintbrushes. So, with Tempera Paint, you need a dry paintbrush. So the water isn't there to use right now. You're going to dip your dry paintbrush in the paint, get some paint on your paintbrush, and we're going to try circles again today because that will be fairly easier with your paintbrush. And you're going to paint around in a circle to make a circle. And you might make some small circles, you might make some medium circles, and when your paintbrush runs out of paint, you dip it again. And we might make some really big circles. Now when you paint with tempera, you want to keep your paintbrush up on the tip. So see how my paint doesn't go up to the orange? It just stays on the bristles. It's halfway up the bristles. And when you paint with a paintbrush, you want to keep it up on the edge of its bristles up so that just the tip of it is touching your paper. You don't want to push it all the way down to where the metal part is touching your paper. You want to keep it up on its tiptoes. Some teachers like to call our paintbrushes ballerinas. They dance on their toes. So our paintbrushes should always be dancing on their toes. You don't have to press down very hard to get them to paint. And then as you run out of paint on your paintbrush, you redip. And again, I'm not scooping the paint up or getting paint all the way up to the metal. I'm keeping just half the bristles on the paintbrush with paint on them. Okay, so this space is filled with circles. You're not going to paint the whole thing just with tempera. You should have some shapes. You're going to set your paintbrush in the water basin and leave it there. I will come around and collect the tempera paint. And the next paint that we are going to use is Tempera Cake. Tempera cakes sometimes are square, like this one, or sometimes they're circles. Doesn't matter if you have a circle one or a square one, they're the same paint. And what this paint is it's the tempera paint that we just used here, dried into a cake or into a solid piece. So this is wet tempera, liquid tempera. This is Tempera Cake, dried into a cake. Now, I don't want you picking it up the way I am right now showing you. I want you to leave it in its tray. And when you use Tempera Cake, you need a paintbrush that's stiff and that's not real soft on the edges. So we have 2 kinds of paintbrushes in the art room. We have soft bristle brushes like this that are soft and bend. And then we have stiff bristle brushes like this where the bristles only bend on the very tip, but the parts that are closer to the metal are very stiff. And so we use a stiff bristle brush. Since this paint is dry, we have to get it wet in order to make it paint. So you're going to take your stiff bristle brush, dip it in the water, in and out, and then you're going to swirl it around on the cake. As you swirl around, you'll see that there's paint sitting on top of the cake now, and you have paint on your paintbrush. So I want you to pick a new space, and I want you to practice painting squares. Now, we should probably talk about what a square is. A square is made up of straight lines like a triangle. Remember, these are straight lines. A triangle takes 3 straight lines. 1, 2, 3. A square takes 4 straight lines. So you're going to draw 2 that go up and down. 1, 2. And then you're going to draw 2 that go across. 1, 2. And notice how they all touch, that there isn't an open space. So I didn't draw a square like this, because that's not a square. It's got to go all the way across and touch. So you could choose to draw your square going across, then down, then across, then up. You could choose to draw 2 up lines and then close it off with 2 across lines. And you may also sometimes draw 2 lines that are longer than the other 2 lines that you need to draw. And what this shape, the square, becomes a rectangle. When you have 2 longer lines and 2 short lines, that makes a rectangle. When you have 4 lines that are all the same length, it makes a square. So I want you to practice with your orange tempera cake, drawing or painting some squares. So I painted 1 line going up and down, 2 lines going side to side, and now I'm going to close it off with my line that goes up and down. Now my paintbrush needs some more paint, and the paint on the cake is kind of dried out, so I need to take my paintbrush, dip it in and out of the water fast, like this, swirl it around. So now I have paint on my paintbrush. Now I'm going to draw a medium square, or paint a medium square. So now I've painted 2 lines that go up and down, now 2 lines that go side to side. And now I'm going to get more paint on my paintbrush, so in and out of the water real fast, swirl around. Now I'm going to paint a really big square. 1 up and down line, 2 side to side lines, and 1 up and down line. Now remember, you could draw or paint some rectangles. Two long lines and 2 short lines make up a rectangle. Now my space is now filled in, so now I need to fill in my rectangles and squares. So I'm going to get some more paint on my paintbrush. There was enough wet paint sitting here, so I didn't have to dip my paintbrush in and out of the water. And now I'm going to fill in, stay inside the lines, fill in these squares and rectangles with solid paint. I do like to paint like I color with crayon, the same direction for the most part. I need more paint, so in and out of the water, swirl around. Okay, I'm finished with the tempera cake, so I will come around and get your tempera cakes from you. You will take your paintbrush and leave it in the water basin. And so for the final 2 boxes, we're going to use watercolor. We're going to use 2 types of watercolor. We're going to use a liquid watercolor, which I will give you in a little cup like this. And if I move it around, you can see it's very watery, very liquid watercolor. And then there is pan watercolor that is dried in this oval shape. So we had liquid tempera and tempera cake that's dried, liquid, dried, and now we have liquid watercolor and pan watercolor dried, liquid, dry. So let's start with the liquid. you're going to take your paintbrush, you're going to dip it straight into the liquid paint. You don't need to get your paintbrush wet. And you're going to go ahead and try again to paint some squares. So there's a small square, dip my paintbrush back in the cup. Let's do a medium square. Do a really big square. Maybe do some rectangles. Oops, I dripped. Sometimes that happens when you're using liquid watercolor. So I dipped it in the water and pulled it back over my paper too fast, and that's why it dripped. So when you dip it in the watercolor, leave it hanging over the cup a minute to see if anything's going to drip out, and then if not, then bring it over your paper. And I didn't do that. I just put it in and pulled it across and it dripped. So once you have your space filled with rectangles and squares, you're going to go back and paint those in. Come around and collect the liquid watercolors. And then the final paint we're going to use is the pan watercolor, the dried watercolor. So this time you're going to get your paintbrush wet, and you're going to get it wet, put it on top of the oval, and pull your bristle across so that you get water on top of the paint. Dip your paintbrush in the water, pull your bristles across the edge of the oval. Bristles are this hairy part on the end of your paintbrush. Dip it in the water, pull it across, and now you might be able to see, I don't want you lifting everything up and holding it with your hands. I'd like you to leave it on the tray, but you can see there's a puddle of water on top of my color. So now I take my paintbrush, I wiggle the water around. I'm not taking my paintbrush and jabbing it in there and trying to scoop out this dry paint. I'm just wiggling it around the water, wiggling the water around like almost like I'm swimming around a pool. And then now I have paint on my paintbrush. And so now in this box, you can do any kinds of shapes you want. Circles, ovals, squares, rectangles, triangles, whatever you choose. So I think I'm going to try a little bit of each. So I'm going to paint a small circle. Now I think I'm going to draw a medium, or paint a medium triangle. Let's see, I'll paint a really big square. Okay, so far my puddle of water on top of this paint is still there. I haven't needed to put more water on my paint yet, so I've just been dipping into the oval pan with my bristles and picking up. My bristles are like a sponge. They kind of pick up the water that's inside, or the paint that's inside there. Now my oval's dry. I don't have any more, so I'm going to take my paintbrush, dip it in and out of the water, pull it across the oval, in and out of the water, pull it across the oval. So now I have another puddle of paint. So I'm going to swim around in the pool a little bit, wiggle my paintbrush, swirl the water around, and now I should have enough paint to finish painting in my shapes in this box. Forgot, let's see, I haven't done an oval somewhere, so I think I'm going to fit a tiny oval in here, and now I have all of the shapes in this last box, which I think is kind of fun. So now that I'm finished, I'm going to take my paintbrush, leave it in the water basin. I'll collect the water basins with your paintbrushes. I'll collect your paints. And then I'm going to show you how to take your paper and go put it on the drying rack to dry. And that way they don't all stick together if we put them on top of each other. So we're going to separate them on the drying rack. Good job, kindergarten.